get this party started. So welcome, Breathing Life into Old Games, the controversial art of ROM hacking. So let's start off this way. Who here knows what a ROM hack is? Okay, good, most of you. Who here has played a ROM hack? Okay. Who here has not played a ROM hack? Chances are you have and you just don't know. When I'm talking about ROM hacking, specifically I'm talking about it with console emulation. So emulation, you know, is where you get a program on your computer and it pretends to be a particular console. And obviously the games that you get for it are called ROMs, yes. Now ROM stands for read-only memory. The idea is that that game is what it is and it will never be anything else. Back in the day when those things were on cartridges and even when they were on CDs, that made a lot of sense because those cartridges couldn't be played on anything except for the console that they were designed for. Even the CDs, back when I first had my PlayStation, I could put that disc in my computer, but my computer didn't know what to do with it. So those games pretty much were what they were. Over time and through the magic of emulation, a community of people have learned how to actually take those read-only memory files and actually edit them. By editing a ROM, we can do all sorts of things. We can change the color of Mario's overalls. We can make Mario jump higher in the air. We can create entire new levels for Super Mario Brothers. With enough work, we can build an entire new game based on the Super Mario Brothers engine. That one is really cool, by the way. I'll show it a little bit later on. Not my work. Speaking of, who am I? My name is Nick Olivieri. I live here in Syracuse. I work at Syracuse University Libraries. The only reason that that is significant at all is to show that I am not a tech person. I don't have a job working with computers besides, you know, Word and Excel. And also that I have a job because ROM hacking is not something that I will ever be able to get paid for. I am also Chili Cheese, the ROM hacker. What does that mean? I created my first hack in 1997. I was a freshman in college. It was a sort of embarrassing hack of The Legend of Zelda. It was called Links in the Hood. It was exactly what you could probably imagine it was. It imagined that Link was living in the hood. It is sadly lost to time. I did, however, make a sequel to it the following year called Links 2, The Pimp Daddy Link, based on Zelda 2. That one, if you search for it, you could actually still find online, but don't search for it. Anyway, since then, I have had my name in the credits of hacks of The Legend of Zelda, Zelda 2, Link to the Past, Earthbound, Breath of Fire 2, where I really made a name for myself as much as anybody could make a name for themselves in ROM hacking is in Final Fantasy IV. So you might hear that and think, well, that's an odd one to pick. If you have, raise your hand if you've played Final Fantasy IV. Raise your hand if you've played any other Final Fantasy game and Final Fantasy IV. So if you've played any of the games past 4, you know that like a lot of the same gameplay mechanics carry over from that one into the following games. They're not direct sequels story-wise, but if you have played Final Fantasy IV, you can slip right into 5, 6, 7, maybe 8, and definitely 9 with little trouble. But there's a whole lot of quality of life stuff in those later games that didn't exist in 4. 4 was the first one that they made for a 16-bit system. A lot of what they figured out would make it really cool about playing a game hadn't even been invented yet. So for me, going back to what was one of my favorite games back then, and then having played later games in the series, and then also learning how to ROM hack, basically it was an untapped pool of opportunity. You know, could I learn how to do the things that need to be done in order to get all those cool features from the later games into one of my favorite games from back in the day. So by taking that question and you know, playing around, letting my imagination run wild, meeting a community of other people who were interested in doing similar types of things, I ended up being one of the primary researchers for what's become like the Final Fantasy IV hacking tool. I've been involved in some way, shape, or form in nearly every Final Fantasy IV hack made in the last decade. And I was the primary coder for Final Fantasy Ultima, which is we released in 2019. It's been downloaded 53,000 times plus on romhacking.net. It's I think the 8th most downloaded Super Nintendo game on romhacking.net. So you know, it's kind of cool. Not like I'm seeing any money from that, but you know, sorry. It's a labor of love, and that's actually part of I think what's important about this is that I feel like when you're trying to do something and get paid for it, you have people who are breathing down your neck talking about deadlines and producers who are telling you, I don't like that, I do like that, do more of this, stop doing that. With ROM hacks, what you have is people who just are doing what they're doing for the love of the game. So instead of, you know, embarrassing cash grabs like the Pixel remasters, you get games that actually mine new quality out of these games that you know and love. So anyway, that's my little diatribe on
Pixel remaster?
the Final Fantasy Pixel remasters, which they released the last couple of years, you know, which are basically the same exact game except it's reskinned. So yeah, that gets under my skin that Square is pulling in, you know, millions of dollars for that. Anyway, onward. So let's talk a little bit about the history of ROM hacking. So ROM hacking has actually been around as long as games have been, pretty much. Let's do this one for a prize. The first ROM hacks that people have been able to play actually were released by the people who made the original games. Who can think of one really big one that probably everybody in this room has played at least once?
Nintendo?
No, and it predates Nintendo.
Okay.
Wait, did you say game or game console?
Game.
I was going to say Tetris. But
Oh, no, prior to Tetris.
Miss Pac-Man?
Yes.
Oh.
Medium or large?
Large, please.
All right. T-shirt. You can be a living, breathing advertisement for my work. So yes, Miss Pac-Man. So it wasn't actually created by Namco. It was the first game in the Pac-Man series that wasn't released by Namco, who actually were the original developers of Pac-Man. It was created by some guy who realized that he might be in legal trouble if he tried to make money off of it, and so he distributed it through Midway, I think, was the distributor of Pac-Man at the time. And so yeah, I mean, it's arguable whether it was the first ROM hack, but it was one of the first ROM hacks commercially available, and one of the most successful video games in history. Another one that everybody knows about, but doesn't really think about as, well, maybe not everybody, but most people know about, but don't really think about as being a ROM hack. Super Mario Brothers 2. Not the one we got, the one they got. The one that we later would know as the Lost Levels. It's mostly just a reskin of Super Mario Brothers. They rearranged all the levels, They put a couple of extra mechanics in there. There's a mushroom that can kill you, and I think some levels have wind that make it harder to make the jumps. But mostly it's just Super Mario Brothers with different
Also got
levels.
super springs.
Backward warp zones.
Yeah.
With
So
a pit, so you can lose a life instead of going back.
so anyway, yeah. There are some other mechanics, but it's largely Super Mario Brothers, and we'll get to it later. But having new game mechanics worked in does not necessarily make a game not a ROM hack. It just makes it more than just a data hack. We'll get there. Okay. What do we got next? Next question for a prize. Eventually, third-party console hacking became commercially available, and this was a thing that happened towards the end of the NES era. Does anybody know about a particular device that I'm thinking of? Just shout it out.
Game Shark?
Oh, you all said it. Damn it! That was. I heard it from you first, I think. Medium or large?
Large.
Okay. I've only got medium left, everyone. I only brought 4 shirts, so sorry about that. I didn't think there was going to be. Part of this must be like 25
For the next panel.
Cool. All right. Anyway, so yes, Game Genie came out in 1990 and looked like that.
Wow.
I remember when this came out, I was so excited. Was anybody around and playing video games back then? Yeah. It was like the coolest thing.
Yeah.
You could do stuff with the games that you were kind of growing bored of, and it made them all new. I mean, it was the same game, but it was all new.
Or if you're renting games over the weekend, you could just so you put on the cheap.
Exactly. Yeah. Because you only had it for like 2 nights, and you were never going to get to the end of it by then. Yeah. Exactly. So what Game Genie did, none of us really realized it at the time, but what it did. It allowed you to enter the original NES Game Genie up to 3 codes. The Super Nintendo one, I had one that I used a billion times, but I can't remember if it was 4 or 5 or maybe 6. I don't know. But each of those codes, essentially, what it was it specified an address within that ROM, a place where a particular byte was. And then it told the game, when you get to that exact part of the game, and you're supposed to run that byte, instead of that byte, do this byte instead. So Game Genie, the original Game Genie, allowed you to make a ROM hack that changed up to 3 bytes of code or data. Which, I mean, if you've ever used Game Genie, you do understand how much you could do just by changing 3 bytes. But modern ROM hacking does a lot more than that. With Game Genie, you can't really talk about Game Genie from a historical perspective without talking about Louis Galoob v. Nintendo of America. So, anybody heard this story before? Few people?
No.
Louis Galoob was the owner of Galoob Toys. Galoob Toys was the the United States distributor of Game Genie. Before they actually put it out to market, Galoob's son got a hold of the Game Genie and fell in love with it like all of us did. He looked at this and was like, wow, this thing is going to sell like hotcakes. And then he thought to himself, wow, Nintendo is going to hate me for this. So Galoob, actually, when he was getting ready to bring Game Genie to market, Galoob actually pre-sued Nintendo to try to stop them from stopping him from selling Game Genie.
So does Nintendo have PTSD now, and that's why they?
Well, I mean, predictably, Nintendo being a huge corporation, and even back then huger than Galoob was, countersued. And the trial went on for about a year and a half. Wasn't resolved. Game Genie originally was ready for market in 1990. Wasn't really widely available in the United States until 1992. Ultimately, am I up to this part yet? Yes. What the court decided was, because Game Genie does not create a new and permanent work using Nintendo's IP, and does not credibly harm Nintendo's market, Nintendo has no legal claim against Galoob. So Galoob won. Now, what does that mean? Does not create a new and permanent work. Well, you plug a game into your Game Genie, and then you plug that into your console, and you do what the Game Genie does. But when you're done, you can always take the game back out of the Game Genie and put it back and play the original game as intended. So it didn't create any permanent new work. The other thing that it didn't do was it didn't harm Nintendo's ability to make profit off of their games.
Probably increased it.
Yeah, arguably it increased it, but Nintendo won't ever tell you that. But it is essential when using a Game Genie to first have the game. You can't just plug a Game Genie into your NES and think that it's going to start playing games for you. So you still have to buy the game in order to use the Game Genie, and that's key. That's very key. The Galoob decision sort of opened up a big floodgate of home game modding. Specifically, oh wait, sorry, I forgot to say this. So game modding is legal as long as the modder does not undermine the copyright owner's potential to earn a fair return for their property. So, like I said, the Galoob decision inspired a wave of PC game modding. Now, like I said before, cartridges, it's still pretty difficult to mod a cartridge. Now we have the tools, we have the technology. Back in 1992, we did not. But PC games already existed on computers. They already existed as files that people who were intrepid enough could go in there and actually edit. So specifically, the games that saw a real boon in modding homebrew levels were Doom and Duke Nukem 3D. Duke Nukem 3D is significant because there was a company called MicroStar who, after all these homebrew levels were created, compiled all of those and sold them and got sued and lost. So, what's the implication of that? Sure, it's legal to do, but it's not legal to profit off of it.
Especially that's about a bunch of other people's work that they would take.
Exactly, yeah. I mean, it's question?
Yeah, when I was younger at TV Toys, they had a whole collection of extra levels you could buy for Doom. I just didn't know if they had software, it was something crazy like $10 for 1,000 extra levels.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of those things existed. The MicroStar trial that they lost kind of just put the stop on all of that. Yeah. I mean, a lot of those were made by fellow 13-year-olds who were really into Doom and didn't have the creativity that we would later have in life.
Nor
But,
the precedence to defend their work.
There was a booth at the state fair too, like computer stuff, and there was like discs of Doom add-ons and all these game add-ons, like little silly mini games like Scrabble or Crossword.
I remember Shaver days.
yeah, you can actually, I mean, you could go up to the vendors right now and you can see people selling repro cards of ROM hacks. You know, it's not legal, but it still happens. You just can't, you know, make an enterprise out of it. You can't start advertising, hey, we got ROMs, come get them, because then you're going to get yourself in trouble. And there have been other people who have tried to, more recently than Microvision, tried to profit. I actually was watching a YouTube on this of top 15 ROM hackers who got sued for trying to profit off of it or something like that. They're like every time somebody tries, as soon as it starts getting big and really good and people start getting interested in it, then the IP owner finds out about it and that's the end of it. But anyway, so yes, PC modding was a big thing, but modding console games remained mostly out of reach. That is until console emulation became common in the late 1990s. So that gets us into this. How to get started playing ROM hacks. So for those of you who have never played a ROM hack before, this might be new information. For those of you who have, sorry, you're going to have to sit through this 3 minutes. So there are basically 3 things you're going to need. Somebody here is going to point out that there is technically a 4th thing. I guarantee it. Acknowledged ahead of time, but I'm not going to mention it unless you do first. So you are going to need, first and foremost, an emulator. And there are lots of them out there. Basically, pick the console that you want to emulate, Google that and emulator, go to any of the myriad sites and download any of the myriad options. This is just a very, very small smattering of what's out there. It's important to note that owning and using emulators is 100% legal. But, and there is a but, you're also going to need ROMs. So, how can I find ROMs? So, the way that you should get ROMs is you should purchase yourself a cartridge reader that you can plug into your computer, plug the games that you own into that cartridge reader, make copies onto your computer, and that's how you should get them, because that is 100% legal. It is legal to own a copy of anything that you have purchased legally.
Right.
What you should not do is download ROMs from Emulator Games, ROMspedia, Emulator Paradise, Free ROMs, or any of the other myriad sites that you might find if you were to irresponsibly Google download NES ROM. Don't do it. It is legal to own a backup copy of a game that you have purchased, but it is illegal to download or share ROMs. Remember what we said about harming the copyright owner's potential to earn a fair return. Yes, question in the back.
Would it be legal to say, have someone else who has the correct tools copy it for you?
I believe that would be legal, because it is legal to create a copy of a cartridge that you own. Technically, even downloading a ROM of a game that you own on cartridge is illegal, or at the very, very, very most legal skates a very, very, very fine line.
Yeah, can I just... There are some ROM hacks that require a certain version of the game.
Yes.
Like, for example, I wanted to play a Zelda hack, so I did it. I patched it, and turns out it requires the 1.0 version. I had the revision A.
Yeah, it happens a lot.
But I refused to download ROMs out of frustration.
Yeah, that actually is, and the thing about cartridge games, I don't know if Sega did it so much, but Nintendo did it a lot. They would release new versions of the game, which to the player on the user end, you could not tell the difference between what was going on in those games, but they were fully different versions. They had data and or code located in different places, and therefore any patch that you make for it is patching the wrong thing. So, yes?
I just want to make sure I heard you right. So if I download a ROM, but I own the cartridge, because I didn't make the copy, it's still illegal?
I believe so. It's a very, very, very tenuous ground.
Okay.
Some people will swear up and down that it's legal because they own the game. Some people say, well, I know so-and-so tried to do that once and then, they got found out and they had to pay a fine. I don't know. Are any of those things true? I don't know.
I'll take the second half of the question, my attorney friend.
All right, so I already kind of showed my hand on the third piece, but the third piece you're going to need is a patch. So the patch is the ROM hack. Why do we call it a patch? Think about it like a clothing patch. If I have a rip on my jeans, I take this patch and I slap it on the rip of my jeans. I don't do that with rips in my jeans, but I could. And what that does is that takes what used to be a rip, and now it is a full fabric again. The patch on its own is basically useless. You might be able to clean your glasses with it or something, but you can't really wear a patch. So just like with that, a ROM hack patch is useless without the game that you're patching it on top of. And it is quite literally a patch. So if you don't, but if you were to think about a video game as a big list of all of the bytes that make up all of the code and data that is that game, the ROM hack patch slaps new bytes right on top of old ones to make the game behave differently. So it is actually a patch. It's just not a physical patch. So yes, the patch is the ROM hack. It works exactly like a Game Genie, except you can change a lot more than just 3 or 5 or 6 bytes. Many patches that you would get change hundreds or thousands or even tens of thousands of bytes. So it's like having 1,000 Game Genies and putting filling codes up into all of them. Technically, if you had that and you had the right console to do that, you could do that, but you wouldn't do that. Anyway, downloading or distributing a ROM hack is legal as long as it's only the patch, because the patch is not anybody else's information except yours. And because none of us who do that make profit off of it, we generally don't care if other people share it as well. There are plenty of patches that you can find on the internet at plenty of places. There are a lot of, if you have a particular game that you love, Super Mario World and various Zelda games have their own sites, SMW Central and Zeldix, I believe is what it's called.
Don't you dare forget Metroid.
Metroid. Anyway, point being, you can just find the community that works on hacking that particular game often and find scads of hacks of that game, and many of them are awesome. But if you just want to sort of see a lot of different hacks, the single largest repository, I meant to say repository, I wrote depository. They're pretty interchangeable. Would be romhacking.net. That is a place to go if you want to get into or expand your fun with ROM hacks. I would suggest going there first, and then from there you can see a broad range of the cool stuff that's being done. There are hacks on romhacking.net for everything from Atari all the way up through PlayStation 3. I think. I don't know if they go beyond that because beyond that you didn't have physical media for your games so much. So I think they're making it a little harder with modern consoles. Yes?
Yeah. Do you use a disassembler or some kind of hex editor to modify them?
I'm going to get into that.
Okay,
I'm actually going to show off some
Oh.
actually hacking in action
Sweet.
if we have time. We're about half an hour in right now, so I think we're doing all right.
Okay. Good.
Because we are nearing the end of this. Kinds of ROM hacks. This is the last part of this, and this has a little bit of show and tell also. So I sat down and thought about like all the different hacks that I know, and I categorized them all into what ended up being 3 categories. 3 major categories of ROM hacks. 1, 2, and 3. So I got 2 more shirts. Let's see who can guess 2 of those 3. Okay, this dude, raise your hand, because last time I said shout it out, that was a mess. Okay, what do you got?
Fan translations.
Translations. Fan translations is one of the ones. I believe it is number 1. Yes, it is. Okay.
Hey.
Is that one size?
Whee!
Hey.
All right, so let's show off some translations. Hands down, I'll show you some translations first. Actually, I have an anecdote for translations. So, in the summer of 1994, I had the great fortune of spending a month in Japan as an exchange student. And I was super psyched because later that year, Final Fantasy III was going to come out for the Super NES. And I was going to get to play it months before all of my friends. And I was like, you know what, I know it's going to be in Japanese, I'm not going to understand it, but who cares, this is going to be cool, I might even buy a copy and take it home for myself. Imagine my surprise when I got to Japan and I realized that Final Fantasy III was not Final Fantasy III, but Final Fantasy VI. We didn't have the internet back then, so like that was not a thing that everybody knew. And Final Fantasy II was Final Fantasy IV, which meant there was a Final Fantasy V that I never even got to play. So, not only did I buy the cartridge of Final Fantasy VI, but I bought the cartridge of Final Fantasy V, and I brought them both home with me, and I played Final Fantasy V in its entirety, from start to finish, and I didn't know anything that was going on in the game. I had no idea that X-Death was a tree. I had a copy of Mario Paint, and Mario Paint had this big instruction booklet, and the instruction booklet had a kana chart in it. So I was able to read katakana, which is what they use to write American words, through very, very long process of this. And And fortunately, most of the items and spells are actually written in katakana, and so they're like words that at least resemble English. So at least I knew what spell I was casting and what potion I was drinking, but I had no idea what was going on in the story. So that was that, and I played the whole game through, and it was awesome, but I had no idea what was happening. But then, flash forward to 1998, and a fan translation for Final Fantasy V actually existed. And finally, I got to play the game and understand what was going on. It was only about a year later that they finally released it on PlayStation, so. But anyway, this was really cool. So I'm going to switch over to this now, and then I'm going to open up number 1 and show off some translations. So, Final Fantasy V we already talked about. Has anybody heard of the Goemon series? Has anybody ever played Legend of the Mystical Ninja on Super Nintendo? So, Legend of the Mystical Ninja is another one of those things. There were, I believe, 3 of them on Super Famicom, and there was one for the Famicom, and there were probably, I think there was one for N64 or something also. We only ever got Legend of the Mystical Ninja. I loved that game. I would have been really, really happy if I knew that I could have played other games in that series, but I never did because they never existed for me. But this is actually, this translation came out maybe 2 years ago or so, and this game, oh, I didn't know we were getting sound, so that's kind of cool. There are things about this game that it's kind of important to see what it's saying.
You're not
This is
sharing
basically a platformer action game. Oh man! Oh, that sucks. Hold on. Sorry, guys. Is it mirroring? Is this what's happening here? There we go. Okay.
Oh,
Extended,
okay.
I meant to make it mirror. I forgot to do that. Sorry. Okay, so it's basically an action platformer, but there's like instructions that they give you throughout the game and exposition that kind of is important. If all of this was in Japanese, then it would kind of be a little nonsensical. Anyway, I'm not going to get into it because the real text-heavy stuff gets when you get to the boss battle at the end, but they're giving you instructions on how to fight this giant robot boss, and it makes no sense if you don't read Japanese. But anyway, it's in English now, and now I can play it, and I can actually make it up to like level 3. Thing is, I'm not good at playing video games, I just like messing around with them. Alright, so anyway, let's get something else up. This one, I bet all of you are going to know about. This is not Super Nintendo.
Oh.
It is, where? Oh, there we go, there it is, okay. Here. You all know that this is what console now? Game Boy Advance, yes it is. Do you know, who can guess what game this is?
Oh, I can see the title.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
in there.
Supposed to say.
Yeah,
Oh.
anybody ever play Earthbound?
No.
Earthbound is like the greatest RPG that Nintendo ever made, and it has a sequel that we never got.
The best sequel.
And there is this awesome human being who calls himself Tomato. His real name is Clyde Mandolin, I think.
Oh,
And he's a professional Japanese translator. He's an American guy who translates Japanese to English professionally, and also is a video game geek, and runs, he's got a site called Legends of Localization, and also does fan translations of things. So thanks to Tomato, we actually have a translated version of Mother 3, which Nintendo will probably never give us. So I don't even feel bad about playing this.
I remember Game Boy Advance.
Anyway, so Yeah, bug-free. Okay. I'm just going to rattle off a couple of things and not actually get into showing you the games. If we have enough time at the end, you're all welcome to come up and play a couple of minutes of something. But we probably don't have time for a whole lot of that right now. Next. I want to show off one more game. This is another Super Nintendo. So this game was created by the team that made A Link to the Past. And you never hear about it because it's not a sequel, it's not a Zelda game. But when you play it, it looks a lot like A Link to the Past. In terms of its artistic style. And it's called Marvelous something that apparently translates loosely to Another Treasure Island. It's this really cool, like mostly puzzle game where you see, this kind of looks like Secret of Mana a little bit. But wait till I actually get to gameplay. You will immediately notice how it looks very much like A Link to the Past, if you've played that before. It's this really cool thing. You get you control these 3 campers, and this is really loud. Hold on. There we go. You control these 3 campers, and you have to like switch between them. There's all sorts of cool puzzles where like you have to put one over here, and then you have to put one like all the way over there, and another one somewhere else, and you have to coordinate all the things that you're doing with them. There's other times that you have to like use 2 of them to lift up a thing because they can't do it on their own. It's a really cool puzzle game in the style of The Legend of Zelda. I recommend checking it out at some point. There is a translation available on romhacking.net, which is also relatively new. So fun game, recommend playing. But let's move on. Okay, who thinks they know another category? And this is my last shirt, I'm sorry. You guys were raising your hands before. I assume you are here together, so you can decide between the 2 of you which one answers. What's that?
Randomizers.
Good answer. Not one of the ones that I chose. All the way in the back.
Bug patches.
So, bug patches is part of the last one of the last 2 categories. So bug patches, what I was going to say is, bug patches are a version of a code edit. So, if you, I'm going to give you the shirt because by the time I'm done doing this, everybody's going to know what the 3rd category is.
You can throw it anyway, that works too.
So, if you think about a game is kind of broken into 2 major components. They're not always like, here's one part and here's the other part, but a game exists of data and it exists of code. The data is the stuff like the arrangement of the levels, it is the graphics, it is the music, it is how many hit points Golbez has, it is all of that stuff. But without the code, the system, the console doesn't know what to do with all that data. So the code is, well, you can guess what, you kind of know what code is. We all vaguely know what code is. The code is what takes that data and arranges it properly, feeds it into the processor of the console, and makes it become a game. So, may as well reveal the other one now. Data edits are the 3rd category. So you can either edit the data or you can edit the code. And you can do amazing things both ways. Bug fixes are one very, very big and legitimizing part of code edits. A lot of these games, especially the older you get, the more you see this type of thing. These games were made by a very small team of people. They usually had very strict deadlines about how quickly they needed to roll this thing to market. They didn't have a whole lot of play testers, so they did the best they could, and in a lot of cases they did really well, but you still have this thing where in Final Fantasy VI, I can cast Vanish on literally any enemy, and then I can cast X-Zone and kill it like that. There are people who recognize those things, know how to manipulate the code, and write bug fixes. Other things that people, I'm not actually going to show you any bug fixes because there's not really generally much interesting to see with bug fixes. But if you can think of a bug in an old game that you like, chances are if you search for it, somebody's made a fix for it. Another thing that is cool about code editing, this is where I actually get to show off some of my own work, are when people will create new features for games. So, I made a hack called A Link to the Past Quick Commands. Who's played A Link to the Past? Okay, good, hands down. Who's played Ocarina of Time? Okay, good, hands down. What's one significant thing, and don't tell me 3D, what's one significant thing about the gameplay of Ocarina of Time that you don't get in Link to the Past? Yes?
The ocarina.
Games, technically. What I'm talking about is mapping different items to different buttons on the controller. For N64, you had the one red button, which was A or B, I don't remember. And then you had the little 4 yellow buttons in the corner, and you could assign a different item to each one of those things. And so one day I was kind of fiddling around, and I thought to myself, well, wouldn't it be cool if you could do something like that in this game? So I made it so that you can do that. So if you go into your menu, you can highlight an item, and you might, depending on how well versed you are in this game, you might recognize that usually there's a circle around the item, but I changed it to brackets. And the reason for that is if I hold one of the shoulder buttons, either L or R, and then I press one of A, B, X, or Y, I can assign a quick command to that button. And I can do that with as many as 8 different things, depending on how many I want to have set up. So I can do this, and I can do that, and I can do this. Okay, and then when I go out...
So now it's Armored Core.
What's that?
Now it's Armored Core. You just have all the weapons, you just use them all.
Yeah, pretty much. So I've got... There we go. So I assigned the hook shot to L plus Y. I assigned the bug net to R plus Y. Let's see, what else did I do? Boomerangs on R plus A. So anyway, that's the thing that I did. It's not particularly fascinating to watch, but if you're playing the game, it's a pretty cool quality of life improvement.
And of course, L and R aren't used, right?
Right, yeah, L and R are not used at all. As a matter of fact, I'm trying to think, is there another button that's not really? No, well, X is used, but not much.
I feel like they could have made the controls a little better for Link to the Past. Like they could have made it so that you had 2 item slots.
Yeah, they definitely could have. So that was sort of what I was seeking to do. I have eventual plans. What I'd like to do is make it so when you hold the R button, like somewhere on the HUD, you get a little picture of all the different items that you have assigned there. I haven't gotten there yet. I have other things that I'm working on, but something that I might do eventually. Now another game that I want to show off. This one is not my work, but it is super cool. Anybody ever played Secret of Mana? So Secret of Mana is a really fun game. It was fun back in the day because multiplayer, but it's also just kind of a cool sort of like combination of action and RPG. But one of the most obnoxious things about this game is how long it takes you to fight things, because you swing your sword, and then you have to wait until this thing crawls up to 100% before you get a chance to swing your sword for full power again. There is this hacker, maybe it's a team of hackers, I don't know, who created a fix for that. This does a lot more than just that, but that's probably the most noticeable thing. So now, I can actually swing my sword, and there's no timer in between that. So I can just go into a battle. Thing is, you never saw it, but the enemies had that also. They were also charging in between hits. So the fighting is a lot more fast-paced now. Right now I'm in the first area, and I've got an endgame team, so I'm going to kick the crap out of them. But if I was fighting things that actually had a chance against me, then I would have to actually be smart about how I fight, because they would also just pound the crap out of you. So anyway, Secret of Mana Turbo, definitely worth checking through. How are we doing for time? 3:46. Okay, I gotta go quick. I'm sorry. Although there's no panel after us, so as long as we're all adamant about staying here, I think we can probably just stay here as long as we want.
Hopefully.
I want to show you some data edits too. So I only really downloaded 2 data edits, and I haven't honestly played either of these games. But this is Super Mario Kart R. So pretty much most if not all of the game mechanics are exactly the same. But everything about what Super Mario Kart looks like is changed in this game. They took out Toad and they put in Kirby, which apparently got some people really upset.
Man.
But you've got all new levels, all new worlds. The courses are all different. This one's kind of cool. This is literally the only course I played in this game. Everybody goes that way. There's like a secret this way where you go around, and also Kirby is really hard to control. But you can do that and whatever. Okay, so anyway, Super Mario Kart R. Apparently there's somebody out there who is creating a brand new Mario Kart based on the engine of Mario Kart, and it's got new mechanics also. We'll get into complete hacks in just a sec. Where's my mouse? There it is. Alright, and then the other one that I wanted to show off, just because it's easy to see how this is different, is a Super Mario World hack called Return to Dinosaur Land. So again, the mechanics are all the same, the gameplay is exactly the same, but the levels are entirely different. The enemies, a lot of the enemies have been reskinned, so they just kind of look a little bit nicer. I believe they're trying to play this up as a sequel to Super Mario World, so Mario does what he does in the first Super Mario World and then returns to Dinosaur Land. Why Dinosaur Land looks completely different, I don't think they really explained that. But yeah, plays exactly the same, so if you just ever wanted extra levels in Super Mario World and didn't know where to find them, now you know where to find them. So, we've gone over translations, we've gone over data hacks, we've gone over code hacks. There are also people who combine some of those things, and those are what we call complete hacks, and that is where things get really, really cool. So I promised you I would show you this before. This game is called, I don't know what this means, but it's called Celeste Mario Zap and Dash. But this is that hack of the original Super Mario Brothers that I showed you a screenshot of before.
Oh, so let's see how this works. So it's mixed with Celeste.
I think I messed up.
Oh yeah, you had an error when you first opened.
Yeah, it was just telling me that I couldn't load the Game Genie codes for Super Mario Brothers. And let me try this again. I wonder if I can see things up in this wonky too. Yeah, we know. Alright, I'm gonna try not hacking this time. I'm not going to get to show you guys this game. Alright, this game unfortunately is not playing. Well, it's really cool. Mario gets all these like special powers, like he can wall grab and he can mid-air dash and all sorts of crazy stuff. It's really cool, but unfortunately I can't show you this. Okay, let me show you this one. This is called A Plumber for All Seasons. This is a Super Mario World hack, and it's beautiful. This is like, I can't even believe this was done on the same thing that I played the original Super Mario World on. Like, the art in this alone is fantastic.
Reminds me of Mario's Missing. They had that more detailed
Yeah.
background art.
Or even kind of Yoshi's Island had
Yeah.
backgrounds like this.
Yeah, and it's even animated, look at that.
This was they asked you, do you want to call it autumn or fall? I usually say fall.
Oh,
The heads-up display is entirely different. You get this thing on the side, and eventually it disappears. But then when you collect coins,
Yeah.
the little thing pops up. They have these things called star coins, which I don't even really know what they do, but there's a separate thing that you collect for them. I don't know if they function like the dinosaur coins in the original Mario world or what, but yeah. So anyway, this game is beautiful.
Yeah.
I haven't played much of it, but I kind of am interested. I downloaded it just because I had seen a couple frames of it on YouTube, and I was like, this is something I should probably show off.
You can see what cables look like and all that.
I guess it's time for me to show off some of my own work, or a little bit more of my own work. So, welcome to Final Fantasy IV Ultima. I'm not 8-bit fan, I'm Chili Tease. I'm the code guy, not the creator of the hack. But, let me show you. Has anybody played Final Fantasy IV or Final Fantasy II if you had a Super Nintendo? Only a couple of you?
or no, I'm sorry. I thought you meant NES.
No. Yeah, the Final Fantasy IV. So if you have played it, you know that the menu was relatively simple. It certainly didn't have my proudest accomplishment, the bestiary,
Nice.
where you can actually, as you go through the game, if you scan an enemy, it gets added to your bestiary. So a lot of people just play the game through and just have fun, Pokemoning it. But then when you do that, you go and you can see all the different items that they drop, which is like key because when you were playing it growing up, you never knew anything that they might drop. You know all of their weaknesses, all of their strengths. This is entirely the product of COVID-19. I had, this is my wife sitting next to the camera. She knows. We sat on the couch for about a year. It was the worst time of my life, but it was the greatest time for hacking Final Fantasy IV. So yeah, there's that. What else did we do? We did party switching. So you'll see this is not the normal endgame party. You don't normally get Edward in your endgame party. Oh, also Edward is awesome. So that's another thing that we did. We put in a thing where you can turn encounters on and off. So if you want to run back to an old area and collect treasures that you missed before, you can turn encounters off and not worry about having to fight a battle every 10 steps. Another thing that you'll notice once I get into a battle here, we put in an ATB meter down at the bottom. That's not something that's there in the vanilla game, so you just kind of had to guess when your next turn was. Sorry, they all have berserker rings on, so they just are going to fight when I get into a battle. Probably kill everything, because as you can see, they're also maxed out on everything. This is actually a player of this game. I asked him if I could have his save, because we created an item that if you use it, it increases each of your stats by 1, and he collected enough that he could get everybody up to 255 in every single stat. He played it on fast forward with some turbo buttons, but even still, I think it was something like 600 game hours or something like that. So anyway, yeah. So this is both the data and the code hack. By the way, if you're interested in playing it, I have these little business cards with QR codes on the back.
Nice.
There's a play and a chat. Come chat, join our Discord. We have a very, very fun community. Yes?
Does it change the game aside from those? Like, is it still
The
same
basic
game?
progression of the game is exactly the same. Now, there are some parts that end up being a little bit easier or a little bit harder based on some of the new gameplay mechanics that we've introduced, but it's still Dark Knight Cecil has to deliver a package to Mist, and then, spoiler alert, accidentally kills Radia's mom, and then she joins the party anyway, and they go and he becomes a paladin because he can't kill the evil things as a Dark Knight, and then they find out that gold business is, and then, all that stuff still happens. But there's a boss rush There's all sorts of side quests that didn't exist before. We introduced a whole bunch of new spells and items that didn't exist before. We actually, Final Fantasy IV has these key items that would take up a spot in your inventory, and they were yellow, so you couldn't get rid of them. We actually moved them into an entirely new place, so they don't crowd up your inventory at all. We also made it so that you can go to the Fat Chocobo whenever you want and store your items. As it turned out, actually expanding your active inventory was a little too much to ask, but we have that sort of fixed in place. Anyway, end result, because we didn't use all those item spots for key items, we actually were able to expand the usable items by an extra 18 to 20 something, I think. So yeah, anyway, I could talk about this forever, but I did have other stuff I wanted to show you guys. The last one I wanted to show you is, this is, I don't know if it's brand new, but it's brand new to me. The guy who created this just recently joined our Discord. He played Ultima all the way through, and he was like, this game is awesome. He was like, by the way, I made a hack too, and he sent us this link, and it's like the most awesome Star Fox hack you could ever possibly imagine. So the story is essentially Mario and Luigi have decided that they want to cancel the Star Fox franchise, and so Fox and crew have to go and fight for their existence. And there's like another Star Fox team, like it's like a weasel or something that's like you have to fight against, and they're trying to swoop in and steal your place. And, anyway, so this is really cool. I haven't played it too much because I only found out about it maybe a couple of weeks ago. But from what I've seen, it seems amazing. Apparently one of the original creators of Star Fox somehow heard about it and somehow reached out to him and was like, I'd be interested in playing that. I would love it if, somebody from Final Fantasy team said that to me, but so far that's not happening. Anyway, so yeah, check it out. It's really cool. I wanted to show you guys some actual hacking in action. So let me get into that. Where is my mouse?
I checked it out, but it requires revision 2.
Yes, and you certainly should not ever download ROMs. Don't ever do it. Okay.
I don't even think you can go on the internet and find any if you try.
I just looked at the time, by the way. It's 4 o'clock. If you were planning on doing other things at the con at 4 o'clock, I won't be offended if you leave. But if you want to stick around and watch me do a little bit of hacking, you're welcome to stick around and see that as well.
How is the binaries organized? I figured that the translations would be strings, so they'd be stored in the data as well. So wouldn't that just be a data hack?
So a lot of times with translations, it's more than just changing the data. You have to change how it interprets it also, because you've got different spacing for the characters. You've got different
I see what you're saying. The way it's organized, it's not just obviously just the strings. It actually, I guess, dynamically loads those values and places them. When it's
So there's usually some code involved also in translation. Not as much as some of those big hacks that I just showed you, but there's definitely code involved in most translations as well. Are all of you still here to see hacking in action? Okay, cool. All right, so let's do this by a vote. Would you rather see me use hacking tools, which will make a lot of sense to you, or hack in hex, which is how I do a lot of things but won't make a lot of sense to the casual observer? Hacking tools, raise your hand. Okay, you'll only see the hex. All right, hacking hex. All right, here we go. Rock and roll. Okay.
So, COVID taught you.
So this is actually, do I get it in both? Okay, see, I closed PowerPoint and now it's mirroring my screen. So this is a thing that I taught myself how to do. Oh, you know what? I can't open it in this. I have to open it in. There's a special fork of SNES 9X called Geiger's SNES 9X Debugger. And it is basically that plus this little debugging window and a hex editor. Here's Super Mario World. This is a vanilla copy of Super Mario World. And I decided one day I was just going to see if I could make it so that Mario could jump higher, just so that I could see how difficult it would be to do that. I guess at the time I was interested in maybe doing other things with Super Mario World, which I never ended up doing, and not because this ended up being difficult, but it ended up being a really good demonstration of how to hack hex. So Super Mario World is very, very generous to us because it gives us this little area at the beginning where nothing attacks you. So you can play around with the physics and not have to worry about, getting killed by a turtle in the meantime. So this is Mario jumping. Right now he can go just to below that apple there, right? So my goal was, can I make it so that maybe he could jump to, look, I've got a laser pointer. Maybe jump up to the birds or something. So how do I do that? So the game, if I look at my hex editor, I know before I said you could divide a game up into code and data. You can also divide a game up into ROM and RAM. So technically once it's loaded into the game, it's all RAM, but the debugger will be able to interpret what was on the ROM and what is actually RAM that was created as a result of all the code doing what it does. So when I'm editing how high Mario can jump, I'm going to first look at RAM. And what I'm going to do is, I'm going to look at all these bytes down here, and I'm going to look for something that moves when I jump. So here I am jumping, whoops, go back into this, okay. Here I am jumping, I see a couple of things move when I do that.
Some of the birds.
Sorry, I'm looking for stuff down here when I jump. Yeah, some of that is controlling the birds moving, some of that is controlling the smoke coming out of the chimney, some of that is controlling the fire and apples, some of it is controlling stuff that you're probably not even seeing and I don't even know about. But there's some stuff that only moves when I jump. So if you look, I see a couple of things right off the bat. There is this byte right here. Yeah, here, let me move this up here for now, just while we look. So there's this byte, changes, then there's this one over here, changes when I jump. There's another one down here that changes when I jump. So there's probably more if I look harder, but those 3 bytes are a good place to start. Now, the first one that I saw was up here somewhere. I think it was this one. Yeah. So this one, if I slow it down, what I'm looking for is, not dim it, slow it down. What I'm looking for is something that is going to change constantly as he's moving through the air. This one, B24, 0. This is probably not that. As it turns out, do you know what this is? This is telling us what sprite is representing Mario. So 0 is Mario standing still. G is Mario like this. And 24 is Mario with his hat a little bit up because he's falling. So cool, but not particularly useful for what we're trying to do here. So then we had this one over here. This one counts up constantly. So this is hex, by the way. Hexadecimal is a base 16 representation of numbers. Our number system is 0 through 9. Hexadecimal is 0 through F. So 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, A, B, C, D, E, F, where A, B, C, D, E, and F are extra digits, essentially. So FF is like 99, except it's actually 255. But anyway, it's not super important to know right now, but I'm just telling you why I can see this is just counting up constantly. When it gets to FF, then it goes up back to 0 and then rolls up again. So it's definitely moving the whole time that Mario is jumping, but what gives me pause here is that it just keeps counting up. I don't know for sure, just by looking at it, that is going to be the most useful byte. Incidentally, I will give you a spoiler, that is the most useful byte, and I spent about maybe 2 or 3 hours searching the red herring that is this byte right here. I think it's this one. Yeah, so this one, notice at the peak it goes up into it counts down as he jumps. At his peak, it goes into 5F, and then it counts back up as he falls. So that looks like it's probably representing how high in the air he is. It is, but it's not particularly useful for the thing that I'm trying to accomplish. As it turns out, it is actually this bite here that I want to take a look at. So now that I've identified the bite, someday if you ask me, I'll show you how I got around to that being the bite that I needed, but it's not important right now. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to set a breakpoint to it. So I'm going to tell the game, every time you do something to affect that bite, stop running code and show me what was affecting that bite. So that is byte number 7D. So it's, we've got 70, 71, 72, 73, 74, 75. This one is 7D. So I'm going to set a write breakpoint to 7D. So I'm telling it, every time you affect 7D, every time you write some new value to 7D, stop writing the code and tell me what that code is. I could also do a read breakpoint, so if I wanted it to stop every time it was reading a particular byte of data, I could do that as well. There's also an execute breakpoint, so if I know a particular line of code that I want it to stop every time it runs that line of code, stop on execution. We're going to do some executing breakpoints in a little bit. Okay. Every time you change byte number 7D, stop the code and tell me what it is. Unfortunately, every single frame it's doing something to affect that code. So, not particularly fruitful right off the bat, but if you look at this, you can see there really are only a couple of different lines of code that are affecting it. So we've got EF60, D94C, and DC4C just running over and over and over again. One of those things is going to show me what it is that I want to do. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to actually have it show me all of those things again as I'm jumping. So I'm going to hold the jump button, and then I'm going to hold the run button, and we're going to see Mario jump in the air, and we're going to see the code run, and you'll notice once he's no longer standing still, EF60 no longer is happening. So EF60 is not what we're looking for. So now we've narrowed it down to D94C and DC4C. One of those is controlling that byte in the way that affects how Mario jumps. So I'm just going in order. I'm going to say, okay, let's stop every time we get to the byte right before D94C. We know D94C is store value in 7D. So chances are, somewhere shortly before that is the part of the code that tells it what value to store there. So I'm going to go stop on D9, forward B. We're going to do an execute breakpoint on D9 4B. And it's add whatever value is at D7A5, comma Y. So that is a constant value. That's in ROM. So D7A5, comma Y, D7A5. Sometimes Y is going to be 1, and sometimes Y is going to be 0. And I will tell you now, what causes that difference is whether or not I'm holding the B button. In other words, Mario behaves differently as he flies through the air, whether I'm holding the B button or not. Who's played Super Mario World before? Who can think of a reason why it would make a difference between whether I'm holding the jump button or not?
He does a tiny hop if you just...
Well, if you just tap it, he does a tiny hop, but not what I'm looking for. What's significant about holding the jump button in Super Mario World? Not all the time, but sometimes. What do you got?
The cape power.
The cape, yep. If Mario is Cape Mario, when I hold the B button, he's going to float down instead of falling down like a rock. Sometimes Y is 1 and sometimes Y is 0, which means it's either reading this 6 or this 3. So, if I want to make sure that Mario keeps jumping when I hold the jump button, I'm going to see what happens if I change this value here. Now, incidentally, there's a little bit of kind of just accidentally discovering things when you're doing this. You kind of have to just play around with stuff, see what works, and if it doesn't work, you try something else. This actually, as it turns out, ends up being almost exactly what I was trying to do. If I change this 3 to the 6, that it is in the not holding B instance, oops, oh boy. 6, and that was a 0. Then, let's unset this breakpoint and we can see what happens to the physics of the game. So remember, it was originally a 3. Now it's a 6. Now when I hold the B button, Mario doesn't jump as high. Which means I increase this value and decrease the height that Mario can jump. So what happens if I go 2? Now, he jumps just above that apple. What happens if I go 1? Now, he jumps really high. So, what do you think happens when I go 0? He literally never falls as long as I'm holding the jump button. He's just going to stay out there. Now, really fun things happen if I roll down even further and I roll into the Fs. So let's see, if I go to, I don't think FF is particularly interesting, but F8 is kind of fun. So F8, he does this. And what's interesting about this is he can also, if he's falling down, I can hold B again, and then he starts doing it again without hitting the ground first. So, yeah, there might be interesting applications for that. I don't know. So another thing that I discovered, here, let's give him some super jumps, but not some super jumps. So we'll go number 2. Just by playing around in this same area of code, I also noticed that if you go back a little bit further, these bytes start getting referenced. And these bytes actually start getting referenced as reads, not as writes. So, so it's saying, depending on various values of y, it's going to read different values here. So in Mario's current version, no matter what, it's going to be 40. But then I noticed there's a 20 here also. Remember we were talking about Cape Mario before, right? And there's a special instance where if you're holding the B button and he's Cape Mario, then he floats instead of falling like a rock. So we know that y equals 1 is when I'm holding the B button. So what happens if I turn this into a 20? Then, not Cape Mario floats like Cape Mario. What happens if I turn it down to 10? Not Cape Mario floats even slower than Cape Mario. What happens if I turn it down to 0? He doesn't stay in the air, unfortunately, but he almost does. Because Mario can change direction in mid-flight, I can just kind of scoot around as he does his very, very slow descent. And then if I let go of the button, he still falls like a rock. Now, interestingly enough, I could do that backwards, and I could make it so that when I hold the B button, he falls like a rock, but if I'm not holding the B button, then he falls super slow. So now I'm holding the button, and he falls normal, but I let go, and then he starts floating. Not particularly useful, but fun to demonstrate anyway.
It could be useful if you wanted to not remember to hold the button.
Yeah. So anyway, that's a very, very, very simple version of hex editing ROM hacks. Obviously, stuff that I've done is usually a lot more complicated than that, but you know, you got to see a little bit of
peeking behind the curtain and snipping the threads or whatever.
Exactly. Question?
Let's say this is your final version and you're ready to distribute it. What do? How do you make it match?
Interesting question. There is a very, very simple piece of software. It's called Lunar IPS. And let me find what directory I have it in so I can show you what it does. It's probably in the Final Fantasy IV hacking folder, because most things are in that folder. All right, here it is. No. Are these in alphabetical order? Yes, they are. There it is. So, Lunar IPS lets you either apply a patch or create a patch. And that's all it does. So if I say apply a patch, it's going to ask me to tell me what game you want to put a patch on, and tell me what patch you want to merge it with, and it does that. And then vice versa, if you want to create a patch, it's going to say, show me the unmodified game, show me the modified game, and I will figure out what's different between those two things and create a patch. it's very simple. That's actually, I mean, that's, of all the difficult things that there are in ROM hacking, that's actually super simple.
So another
Wow, it's automated.
Yeah, super simple for me.
So another question is, like, you know, you kind of poked around and looked at various actions and values term. Is there ever a case where you kind of know the address of, like I know like the original Atari Pong or Atari Tank, you could get that code so you could like look up the address. Is there any cases where?
Yeah, so I'll show you a couple of things. So this debugger here will, if you give it a start point and an end point, it will show you all of the code that exists there. So if we wanted to see, okay, so this is, I don't expect you to know what a subroutine jump is, but a subroutine basically is when code is running, sometimes it'll say, okay, given this conditional, we're going to go into this separate branch of code, and we're going to jump out, and when we're done, we're going to jump right back to where we were. That's a subroutine. So when I run my breakpoint on this piece of code, and then I hit jump out, or step out, it's going to take me to the part right after where it jumped into that. So then I know the byte before that is the jump into that. So that's CD8A. CD8A. So when I run that, it's going to tell me exactly where it's jumping to a subroutine. So it's jumping to D7E4. So now if I say disassemble D7E4 through, where were we, D94C, D94C, and you have to tell it whether you want an 8-bit accumulator or X and Y registers, which, don't worry about it for now. We're just going to say that's what it is. That might not be right, but I'm just, for the sake of demonstration, it doesn't matter. There are different registers that exist in the CPU, and in Super Nintendo, sometimes they're running in 8-bit mode, sometimes they're running in 16-bit mode. And it matters for what the code is because there will be parameters that either assume 8 bits or 16 bits, but anyway, whatever. You don't care about that. So then it lists out all the code that exists between those two values. And then I have a whole view of all different code in this game. I can see what's going on, and if I understand what it's saying, I can change all sorts of things. If you look at right here, that's that D7AF that I found that led me to finding, changing these 40s to a 20 or a 10 to change how it falls. That's how I figured that out. Sometimes you're lucky enough that a game is popular enough and people are passionate enough about it that they have actually disassembled the entire game. And sometimes you're even more lucky than that, and not only have they disassembled it, but they've also done a commented disassembly, where they've actually said, this is the part of the code that's talking about how high Mario jumps. This is the part of the code that's talking about what happens when Yoshi eats an enemy. Exactly. So things like that make it super useful for people who are doing ASM hacking to actually do what it is that they want to do. The more popular the game, the better chances are there's somebody who actually has done that already. Anyway, any other questions? Yeah.
Yeah, how did you tackle this problem? I mean, I know this exists, I think even MGBA has a built-in debugger, but how did you, I guess, approach the problem when you were just starting off in the 90s especially, when this is, I think, a little more difficult?
So in the 90s, I didn't do any of this stuff.
Okay.
In the 90s, there was an emulator for Nintendo, which is called Nesticle. And it had a data viewer that would allow you to change. It had a hex editor, but it didn't have a disassembler.
Yeah.
But if you knew where some data was, you could change some data, and it also had a graphics viewer, so you could change the graphics also.
So you're just watching memory, or you, and by memory I mean like the registers and like the stack, or were you just looking at, I don't even know what, yeah.
So you're looking at memory, but it's telling you where that memory is coming from.
Gotcha, okay. And this is Nesticle?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, or actually, you know what, now that I think about it, that's not how it worked. Nesticle would just show you, it would show you the different graphics tiles that were in play, and it numbered them. So if you looked at all of the letters, which were graphics tiles, and then you created basically a table of all of those. So like 0, 1 is A, 0, 2 is B, 0, 3 is C, etc. And then you plugged that into a hex editor. It could find, it would replace all of those values, even when 0, 1 didn't mean A. Sometimes it doesn't. But when you have something that's representing all of the 0, 1s as A's, all of 0, 2s as B's, if you scroll through it, eventually you're going to find stuff that looks like text. And so you can actually edit text by doing that. It's a multi-step process. It's complicated, and there are tools now that are much more convenient than that. But yeah, back in the day when I was making links in the hood, that's how I was editing the text.
Oh, geez,
and it was a mess.
It sounds yeah. That's cool. Sweet.
Yeah. So now, like when I got into it later, so I started hacking in 1997, like I said. What I didn't tell you is, in between 1998 and 2012, I did not do any ROM hacks. I picked it back up in 2012 because I was working somewhere where they had this little like mini computer that was connected to a display screen that we were just getting rid of, and I was like, well, can I have that?
Nice.
And so they were like, sure, we're just going to throw it out. So I took it home and I hooked it up to my TV, and I figured out how to install Windows on it. And I was like, okay, now I've got this, what do I do with it? And I was like, well, emulation, of course.
Right.
And then I was like, oh yeah, I remember that thing I did with ROM hacking. And then I started like actually getting into it. And basically what I decided was I was going to try to do a thing. I didn't know anything about how to do anything, but I picked a particular thing I wanted to do. What thing I wanted to do was, if you've ever played Final Fantasy IV, there are these items you can win, super rare drops from some enemies that are, we call summon orbs. It's just a round thing, and it teaches her these 4 spells that you would never learn naturally. My goal was, I want to make that summon orb teach her a different spell, because the imp call spell sucks. And so I spent probably about 2 or 3 years like fiddling around with Final Fantasy IV with the ultimate goal of trying to figure out how to do that. But I learned so much more along the way, because you just, the more you look at this code, the more it starts making sense to you.
Right.
If you were in Joe's Nest Maker panel, he said the same thing. He's absolutely right. The more you stare at this and the more you kind of like see how this, the more you see how this translates into stuff here, it really does actually start making sense.
Just in the Matrix.
Yeah, exactly. I kind of am the Neo of Super Nintendo. Yes.
So wait, so you see the binary file, you actually understand the instructions going on?
When I'm writing code, like I used to do things like this. Hold on. Let me find the Ultima folder. These text files. Alright, so all these text files, these are all different code that I wrote for this game. Everything that's in capital letters, so, yeah, anyway, so let's find, hold on, there's bestiary. Like I said, it's sort of my crowning achievement. This is like the longest plain text file you'll ever see. This is all of the code that runs the bestiary. So this I did have to actually sit down on a notepad file and plan out. So basically what I did was I started with the assembly, so that's this stuff here. Now no matter what game you're playing, this increase the Y register by 1 is always C8 on Super Nintendo. So basically I took all the code, I wrote the code, and then I had to go back into this this website that tells me what all the bytes are, and I had to actually write out all of the bytes. I'm not going to show you the website, but it's...
I was going to ask, this wasn't well documented, right? The manual didn't exactly exist.
Right.
Now you're using an actual reference to be able to look up this instruction and be like, okay, this instruction does this.
Exactly.
Cool.
So it's mind-numbing, but at least it's not difficult to do this. So yeah. But now when I'm writing symbol code, I don't even bother doing this anymore. I'll just go right into the hex editor and I'll just start typing stuff out. And I'll reference that website that tells me what all the different bytes are, but I'm writing code directly into hex because it saves me a couple of steps.
Yeah, that's crazy, that's cool.
Anybody else? Questions? I was going to show you, by the way, there are tools that are really cool that exist that allow you to get into ROM hacking without doing all of this stuff. Specifically, I was going to show you the Final Fantasy IV one that I created, that I helped create, and also, now I'm not a programmer, by the way. I don't have a programming background. I learned code, specifically, I learned assembly. I don't know C++, I don't know C#, I don't know Python, I don't even know BASIC, but I know assembly, because it's, for me, it's practical, even though it's not practical for doing anything else in the world. Since Zelda is generally more popular than Final Fantasy IV, let me show you Z-Screen. This is, I think it's a relatively new Zelda editor. Whoops, did I just, yeah.
So are these tools specific to a game?
Yes. Usually when you get a tool, it is very game specific. There are some tools, there are graphics editors that will be able to interpret the graphics of most games that allow you to change, what the sprites look like. But if you're talking about a game that is hacking the data of, a program that's hacking the data of a game, it really is probably only programmed to do one game. There are some people who are intrepid enough to make like a multi-game editor, but they're usually like there's one that'll edit Final Fantasy 4, 5, and 6, these are free Super Nintendo Final Fantasy games. There are some similarities between them, but most things are just game specific. When we open a copy of Link to the Past in Z-Screen, it shows us all the different maps. You can change what pops are in the map. You can change what NPCs are there, what items are in the treasure chest, where the exits are, all that stuff. You can change stuff about the overworld. You can do some basic graphics editing here. What's really cool is you can change the text. And you can change all the text, and its text editor is searchable, and it has all the different special things that Zelda's text can do also. So if you've ever beaten the game, at the end the Triforce talks to you, and it does this thing where the letters appear and then they disappear slowly from the left to the right. It's the only time in the game that ever happens, and all it's doing is it's adding spaces where there used to be letters. But there's a special mechanic in the way it displays text that allows it to do that. Then there's a button prompt, or it will just scroll automatically. All that stuff is in there. So what I was going to do is I was going to show you. Everybody knows, if you played this game as many times as I have, the first words that you see when you first start a new game are "help me." So I'm going to search for "help me," and I'm going to find that thing that Zelda says to Link in his dream right before his uncle goes away to do some mysterious thing and die. So we can change this thing to whatever we want. Okay. I was hoping somebody would give me something ridiculous. And it's giving me this live viewer down, not live, but this viewer down here that shows me when I get to the end of the window. So if I wanted to say, never gonna give you up, never gonna, by the time I get to gonna, then things are gonna get messed up. So I know I should go to a new line here. I mean, I could say never again, but that would be silly. So then I'm gonna go, I believe it's bracket to bracket, that takes me to line 2. And then bracket 3 for line 3. And then what happens after that is we have to do we're going to do a wait for key. So we're going to do a button press prompt. And then we're going to scroll up one line. And then I'm going to give you up, let you down, I'm going to run around. And desert you, yeah, right? Yeah. And desert you. And then we'll wait for a button. Oh.
Is that a typo?
Yeah, it is. And also, I forgot. One thing it is very particular about is it needs to be a capital K. It needs to be a capital V. That's how close the next line is. And then we're gonna do another capital K at the end. And then we're gonna save our changes.
Yeah, there.
Oh, to dirt.
That just makes it funny. That is the first time you ever used capital letter. I'm impressed.
All right, so then we're gonna save it. This is just a thing that you can just say okay to for now. All right, now let's play our game. There it is.
What a treat.
That's the whole thing.
Great.
So congratulations, you're a ROM hacker now. All right, so that's pretty much all I've got to show off. Hope you guys had some fun. Well, thank you very much for coming. If you haven't taken one of these, there are plenty left. You can actually collect them all if you want. I've got enough for everyone to have all 5. 4.